Hi, I'm Mike Lee, and welcome to Hudson Presents, Conversations with Contemporary Artists. I just happen to have one right by me, Professor Jeremiah Teipen, whose show Inter-Exit Face is behind us, to our right and left, on the ceiling, all around us here in the Deneen Hall Gallery on campus. So settle in, and I think we'll have about 45 odd minutes to talk with some questions and answers. This is the first one of our fall 2021 series, of which there will be 3 more, 2 individual artists, and then we're inviting Jeremiah and Professor Donna back for our little December holiday treat to talk about some other things. So please help welcome Jeremiah Teipen. While Michelle gives a luscious pan of the ceiling work, Jeremiah, tell me a little bit about your upcoming show at the Nars Foundation.
Yeah, this exhibition is all past work. The exhibition that's coming up that will open October 15th will be part of the Sunset Park Wide Open in a lot of different cultural institutions and organizations in that neighborhood of Brooklyn on the 16th and 17th of October. It'll be up until November 5th, and that's a whole new piece that I'm currently, finishing up, and it will be an immersive installation. So there's a similarity between this show and that show, but one is new work. That one's new work, and this one's previous work.
Look forward to seeing it.
Yeah, I look forward to finishing it. It's coming through your brain. I don't know, but I'm sitting there. Everybody's asleep. It's late at night. And I'm in front of my computer, and there's a plastic cup with ice cubes melting in it. And I just think, I'm going to Google ice cubes melting in a plastic cup. And I did. And I got back from that search a lot of different images and media. And I just started taking that stuff and patterning it and overlapping it and layering it. And by the end of the night, I had this composition, which is roughly this composition. It's, it looks a little bit different when it's on the computer than this print, because this print had gone through the printer multiple times. I printed each layer individually with that, so they all kind of build up. So then that composition became an animation, 2D animation. That 2D animation became textures for 3D animations. And I just kept kind of folding that imagery back on itself. It became more and more condensed and just highly saturated sort of media space, to the point where it became cubes again. And some of this you can see cubes. Sometimes you can see ice cubes, and yeah, to the point where it literally became an ice cube again in a cup in some of the video. But I think it was at some exhibition I had. An older gentleman said, I wish I could just pause it and look at it. And I thought, well, maybe I could do that. I don't want to
called
pause.
painting.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so I did. I took stills from some of the animations, and I made these kind of paintings that are also partly digital and partly painted. Some of these are actually completely glued on, I painted them separately, glued them on. There's lots of layers to it. A lot of sort of the things I was doing in that digital space, I was also doing with paint. So I kind of like that crossover also. So yeah, there ends up being these kind of more traditional. These are prints on linen, and then these are pieces on canvas, and then of course the animated works. So anyway, that whole sort of idea of this ice cubes melting in the plastic cups was a kind of this metaphor. And the original piece was in a show at Queens Museum called Raising the Temperature, which was about climate change, right? And so I saw that kind of as a metaphor for that. There's the ice is melting, we have the earth is warming, the polar caps are melting. There's a lot of plastic in our ocean, so there's the plastic cup, but there's also this other sort of dimension to it about sort of just ideas and information and media being able to be solid, sometimes liquid, sometimes gas, almost like the different states of matter. So I kind of like that metaphor too. So rampant, and it just keeps building into other works, right? It's been going on for quite a while.
Yeah, and as folks will see from other work that we'll look at as we sort of perambulate around the gallery, even though obviously not every piece has ice cubes in it, I feel like it is kind of like a wonderful metaphor for anybody who's working with, media that is time-based, but also media that isn't, solid and something that is, for lack of a better word, gaseous or liquid that can travel. Because I think part of the title of the show has to do with states of being.
Yeah, I mean, just as you're saying that, I'm even thinking that that's part of the traditional media process. You paint something, it's this liquid form, and you can work with it, or you sculpt something, and it can be moldable. Then at some point, it crystallizes, and that's going to stay there for perpetuity.
Let's travel over to these.
Sure. Yeah. These actually predate this piece, so you can kind of go back in time a little bit here to see some of the work I was already doing some work based on found media, based on just gathering a lot of things from the internet and kind of compiling them together to be these kind of spaces. I think with these, like this one is called Social Network. It's roughly like a social network page. People that remember MySpace might recognize the aesthetic of like all these sort of layers of transparency and kind of overstimulation that people would use to build their their sort of identities, online identities. And so that kind of relates to that. These two are other kind of media spaces with kind of like a web browser, kind of like a desktop space, but then also like maybe something went haywire and your computer just started flowing all of this media from the internet in.
Right. I mean, certainly, and we were talking earlier about ancient civilizations having foreboding, inconclusive ideas about what technology would do to them. When I see these, it does remind me of, all of the very negative things people have said about constantly being online, constantly being inundated. And it does feel like, what am I trying to say? You would never actually see it in this way, but this is the way it sometimes feels. So it has this sort of emotional quality to it, even though so much of the time video art, most people don't pick with being a very emotional medium. But I feel like you've made it that way. And in some cases, because of the appropriation of, people, things. I mean, I'm looking at Sid Vicious and Dick Cavett. And, these are from really old television shows from when we were both kids.
Right. This side are all creative people who, I mean, of course, there are other people in the videos besides the people, but these are all sort of creative people that's Janis Joplin being interviewed. And the people that maybe because their own kind of creative abundance sort of, died early, maybe because of the result of that, right? Or like so sort of creative that, that's the myth and the legend anyway, right? Sure. And on the other side are robots, sort of the antithesis of that, right? These artificial beings. So this piece is called Robots Don't Smoke, right? Because probably all these people on this side smoked a lot, and most of them died of drug overdoses. And the play buttons here are actually cigarettes. You can see as they play down, the ash goes over rather than your normal little playing button, and the play button is a light. But then I kind of came to this conclusion that robots do smoke, but when they die, then they smoke. So it all kind of came full circle.
And I think it goes without saying, of course, when everyone says that, they're about to say it. The collage aesthetic is so strong. in these, but also the work that we were just looking at. When did you when did you think, oh, that's what I'm doing? All of this is collage. Is that from the very get-go, or at some point were you thinking, oh, that's what a lot of digital art is? It's collage of a different form.
Yeah, and so many things are pieced together from things that have already existed, right? And some contemporary photographers are like, I don't need to take photos anymore. There are so many photos have been taken.
Oh, yeah, like Robert Heineken.
I can just take the photos that are out there and put them in a sequence. And if you think about a photographer, sometimes their gift, their ability is to decide what to include in the frame, right? The stuff's already there.
Sure.
Some people set stuff up, but some people just take a photograph of whatever's there, but they have to make all these decisions. And if there's already all these photographs out there, maybe you don't have to pick up a camera anymore. You can still be a photographer by taking those photos that already exist, right? And deciding which ones to use and how to use them. It becomes another, piece of language, right? And I think that's, what happened here. There's just all of the stuff that's already out there. I could just take it and arrange it into a new arrangement, just like, many artists have done for millennia or centuries anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. If we move to this very lit up animated sculpture, I believe you were telling me earlier, this is one of the earliest, if not the earliest piece in the show.
This, I think, actually, maybe the piece over there, the silver buckyball piece, might predate this one. But yes,
Okay.
It is one of the earliest. It's been configured in many different ways. It's sort of like I built it as a sort of module system. Originally, it was actually hanging through a stairwell, a glass atrium, so people could see it from outside. That was its original installation. But it's called Lithium. That's the title of the piece, and it's each one of these parts are kind of a visualization of a lithium atom, right? As the nucleus and the 3 electrons around it, atomic number 3 lithium. And I was interested in that because lithium is something that people can take and it changes our biology, right? People take it for psychosis, but it's also the thing that powers our external brains, right? These things that
I
we
was
all
just
have.
about to say, like,
And-
oh, isn't that? Yeah.
Right. So you have this
Contour
thing
thing.
that's both biological and sort of digital, affects both things or relates to both things. And I think you were even saying this earlier that you can only remember one phone number in your life or something, right? Because these things have sort of taken over. So I like that kind of connection. It's also because it's atomic number 3, all color that we use on screens, whether it's your phone screen or computer screen or television or whatever, with RGB, right? You have these 3 colors that when you combine, the light of the 3 are combined. So each one of these has red, green, blue LED inside. And then there are microcontrollers that can control what levels change the color throughout. That's another sort of nerdy aspect of it that I think you could probably tell I work with color a lot. There's a lot of color in this stuff, right? It's not
Yeah, indeed.
right? It's not monochromatic or just about value.
We'll get a little bit of the tan in of this, which is nice. So obviously, as Michelle is very beautifully panning through the sculpture, we're looking at something that's 3-dimensional. We have been looking at things that were largely, frames or screens. Hopefully this isn't too broad a question. How does the sculpture inform the work that is in some ways more contained to those 2 dimensions? Or maybe conversely, how does that, even though it seems like it's largely image-based, how does that work with the things that become more like objects?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's when I'm making those animation stuff, there's definitely like 3 dimensions in there, even though it's 3 virtual dimensions, right? So maybe I was already sort of predisposed to that because I made so much sculpture. I really thought of myself as a sculptor and making installations, although often incorporated media, incorporated digital, whether it's video or animations or lighting or sound or all kinds of things. But also earlier, you were asking me the different sort of dates of things, and I was saying, I'm not sure of everything, but I know what was made before my son was born and after, this kind of big event in my life, right? So, not kind of, it is a huge event. But the other thing about that is that I had space and time, and after he was born, nothing wrong with this, but I made some things that could be easier to store. So I started making a lot of 2D stuff. I just I'm thinking about this right now. So this piece, this big 3-dimensional piece, was more like the art I was making before that, because I had, that kind of studio space to store it, right? But then, that kind of shifted to having more home space for it.
Yeah, I mean, this is, for those of you who are just tuning in tonight, this whole series is predicated on artists that make New Jersey or New York home, people from here, people who have moved here, and everyone tuning out here is well aware of the constant struggle for space, money. It does become like a very large factor in how things get produced. It's good to note that, for both young and old, amateur and professionals.
Right. Imagine the storage of this compared to the storage of a digital file. Right? It's like they're 2 very different things. Yeah, but so I think making stuff in 3 dimensions with my hands and physical things, I think it allows me to think in 3 dimensions on a computer better than maybe someone who wasn't didn't have that experience beforehand. I mean, some of the best 3D models I know are really good sculptors, actually, right? They can sculpt in traditional materials, and then they take those same sensibilities to the computer. They make amazing stuff. So I think there's, it's not just one or the other. It's usually the combination of those.
Do you find that the artists that you enjoy looking at yourself are the ones who work across media?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I like looking at a lot of different work, obviously, but I do like that sort of experimentation with just working with lots of different things, right? You're not, it's one or the other, or continuing to experiment is what I've always done and continue to do and will continue to do. So so I like seeing other people do that too. Sure.
So we'll kind of scoot into this niche piece here, and I think I'll move. Let's see, what's the best thing to do? Maybe side by side.
Yeah, maybe.
Or should I move over here?
So just to continue what we were just saying, this piece has obviously this kind of traditional elements. It's a wood panel, right? So that's like it's a still life. But I did form these in 3D on computers, right? So some people ask like, oh, are those objects? Are they physical objects? But no, that's completely I think it seems pretty obvious that it's completely digitally created, but it does feel somehow physical, because what you're seeing is really the light reflecting off of wood, right? You see that wood texture inside of those objects, right? So if this video was playing on your screen, this animation, it's a totally different thing, right? It's really about the wood, the way the wood reflects the light, it soaks in some of it, absorbs some of it.
As I was watching you install the show, I had no idea if there was going to be any projection on this, because you would install the piece before for the projector, and I thought, I'm gonna really have to ask him about that. And then when I saw the video, it does seem like there's definitely humor in this, and part of it is because it has this very traditional wood panel, and it's, you know, the traditional still life, even though, you know, the more you look at it, the stranger it gets. What you were saying about, you know, coming up with these things almost makes me think of how artists typically work in that genre, setting things up on a table and drawing them, and you're literally doing the opposite. You know, it's like from your mind, but getting objects that look lifelike, sort of like looking backwards, sort of like from the optic nerve out.
Right. That's very interesting way to put it. There's a second. I put two kind of works on the same panel here, so this is the second one, and this was made pre-pandemic, but those are viral forms that, you know, are sort of modeled to look like viruses, and then there's a connection there with that sort of micro thing with that cactus and the repetition on the cactus, but it's still a very sort of abstraction. Again, it's like these biological things, but they're also very digital, you know, very virtual, right? Even though they're representing those things from the natural world.
And I can't get over the fact that these remind me of sometimes very particular, like Mont Sanchez-Martin, like Baroque still life, with the very dark background and the shallow foreground. And it's really something. I'm very drawn to that. You should probably
Walk back around
this way, and then
just the way we have things set up here, we'll come around to what I'm pretty sure is the oldest work in this exhibition.
Right.
You know, one thing we'll have to make sure we talk about the centerpiece here too, but we can maybe do that after a couple other.
And as we are reconfiguring, again, a shout out to our crack team. Because this is not an easy thing to do. Seeing a show in situ.
Just to kind of continue to talk about these, you know, connection between micro and macro, between physical and virtual and artificial and natural. And then this form kind of puts those things together in different ways. Some of these are actual nerve, you know, these shapes of these cutout reflective mylar are actually nerve endings, and some just kind of look like they could be veins, or they could be nerves, or they could be roots or tree structures or something, right? So they've got this, they bridge these kind of very small things with these larger things, but also that's highly artificial, but is still kind of looks like some kind of root or natural form.
Right, and for folks that are obviously just seeing this on their screens, this is what, silver, like mirrored mylar.
Yeah.
What looks to be like at the top, or sort of or thrumming brain type figures, made with insulation of some kind.
Yeah, it's actually recycled bubble wrap.
Oh.
Deliveries that I used for that part. And yeah, so that is sort of literally the brain. The controllers are in there. There are LEDs that both reflect off of the mylar and cast shadows. So in a darker space, that's more accentuated. But the other element in here is there's some wind flowing through, which causes a little bit of movement. And there are also vibrating motors, like the ones in your devices, that are buzzing, that are turning, vibrating different parts of this at different times. So that's probably harder to see in the online video, but should come and see it in person.
Yeah, which is actually doable. The gallery is open. I feel terrible not knowing exactly the protocol.
I think
we
it's-
can tackle that in a few moments.
Sure.
We'll figure it out, and then we'll announce to you folks how to do such. But Jeremiah's show is concurrently with Professor Lori Riccadana's show in the other half of the gallery, and it really is, it's quite a one-two punch because the work in some
Lori's show is
ways
amazing.
relates,
Yeah.
but not in a way that might be very easily figured out. But it's very obvious that this has like these root shapes, these nerve shapes, the connection between us and what some people have joked to be like the hive mind that we share these days by being completely and sort of utterly connected.
We used to call it, we are all wired, right? But now
Right.
those things aren't wired. All the information is
Exactly.
wireless.
The internet
But,
the internet of shoes, the internet of your earrings, the internet of masks. And then it makes me think about the next work that we'll take a peek at. Tell me if I'm incorrect. This definitely has to do with physical mapping of like three-dimensional space.
Yeah, it's both that, but also like the mapping of maybe completely non-dimensional, or I don't even know how to say that, your psyche, right?
Right.
There's the Rorschach ink blots that are animated. There are also 3D prints of Rorschach ink blots that are like these kind of islands and this sort of what seems like the map of physical space, but then it's the map of non-physical space.
All right, I must confess, I only just realized that those islands are coming from the Rorschach ink blot.
Yeah, both the 2D ones on the prints, but also these 3D ones too that are printed in white, so they capture the projection, especially down on the base. But even the ones on the wall are capturing the projection from the middle of the room. And then we have these two framed canvases that have very thick amounts of semi-translucent medium on the acrylic paint, and so they both sort of soak in and reflect the animations. But one is the sky, so these are actually clouds inside of that Rorschach plot. The other one is the water, that kind of repetition of lapping, crashing waves and things. And both of those things I think are also ways that, kind of like Rorschach ink blots, especially the clouds. You can look at the clouds and maybe what it looks like to you is like a ink blot sort of, it could be something, right? But there's also this ceiling in my childhood home that had this sort of texture on it that's a little bit similar to this.
Oh, I'm glad you bring that up because I wanted to ask, why, delimit it in the frame? Why have the thick impasto? Well,
Well, and it's also a little bit wave-like. If you look at this close up, you'll see there's the peaks and troughs of the sort of waves that are coming up and down. But then it also, the ceiling is something that I would just stare at in my bed and like let my eyes sort of go out of focus, and then I would see, kind of project my own thoughts onto it. So now, now I'm literally projecting something.
I mean, it's great how, and I look forward to the other artists we have coming up, but I know Professor Riccadana, Lori, and I talked about very similar thing, what things from early on, childhood, but then up through, early experiences in college, artists that you looked at, but the stuff that I find the most fascinating is maybe the most mundane. Everyone has the popcorn ceiling or this kind of like, rough stucco work. There doesn't seem to be any other kind, all the suburban homes I knew
Right.
growing up. And I also think these things remind me of the CAT scans of one's brain.
Well, on the bottom here, those are kind of like that. That's where I was actually looking at a lot of CAT scans, but I didn't use that kind of imagery. But so there's some other things going on in here too. That the waves on the bottom are a transparency grid. So in digital media, when you want something to be transparent, you make it white or black or another color. It could just be that color, right? You don't know it's transparent. So you use this grid that won't be there later when you actually, publish the work or something, but it's there as a placeholder to tell you that it's transparent. So I used that, actually animated that as kind of waves. And now on top of that are these sort of braiding forms, and going through that form kind of looks like it could be a CAT scan, or how those colors kind of change when the brain is stimulated different ways inside of those a scanner like that. But it's actually the test screen, right? That kind of color bars on a screen, which is also like what happens when you don't have a signal anymore. At least, when we were kids, the signal went out, the bars, right?
Yeah.
So both of those are kind of the absence of things, but they're also something, right? But anyway, another
Well, again, I mean,
layer of it.
it seems to tie into this idea of states, states of mind and states of matter.
Definitely.
There's
Yeah,
so many
definitely.
cliches about how we live in the world with technology. I mean, everyone knows The Matrix, the movie, and it obviously references, something that has been around far longer than technology as we know it now. But I feel like the technology that we, have, on my phone in my back pocket, it makes me think more about sort of the invisible grid, invisible matrix, meaning like all the things that we're tied to, whether it's like, the plastic cup floating in the ocean or the ocean itself, and what you're doing now. Do you feel like, making this kind of work just makes you think more and more about your connection, your son's connection
Yeah,
to the world?
I also think that the way we think, the way we're wired, and how our neurons are constructed together, like the sort of neuroplasticity that happens. And when younger people grow up with different types of media, their brains are actually forming different than ours. And I think one of those things is the ability to really see all the interconnectedness of the world. Like, we're so aware of what we do affects the planet, and affects different environments that might be outside of, where you live, right? And I don't think people were that sort of always aware of that, right? And I think some of that has to do with media, right? I think that, maybe pre-Gutenberg press, people thought in one way, but after the Gutenberg press, people's brains were wired different ways. And the way they connected things, they saw things from a different point of view, from that kind of author's point of view, that one sort of perspective, and that view from one spot. But now we're seeing so many different sort of simultaneously seeing things and experiencing things from so many different places because of networked media, that it's changed the way we understand how all that stuff is connected and how we think about it. That's like, it's a completely altered perception.
Right, because obviously, there's the physical hardware that make invisible networks, but then it comes back to being a physical network because it's me and you talking.
Right.
Right. Like, we're here in real space, making a network of people that exist not in real space, but obviously are existing in their apartments and homes as we speak.
That's right. This is all this part of it.
So
should we talk about the middle piece?
Yeah, and then over there, yeah.
okay, sure.
All right. So this work is a variation on a piece that I made at the Asia Culture Center at a residency while I was on sabbatical in Guangzhou, Korea. And for that piece, I had these kind of sculptural forms that I made with, using all the resources that I had as part of this residency. And you stood on the outside and kind of looked in on the form and saw, the projection. And for this, I kind of inverted that. I thought it was funny how you were kind of talking about the sort of way a traditional artist might take the still life and draw it and switch it off and sit in this kind of inversion too. And so now, we're inside of it, and it is projected on all the other work too, right? So then, all of this work is now changed from the original way I do it, so how this moves a layer. But this is different spaces from around residency, and as this show continues, more and more I'll integrate things from around this exhibition. So it'll morph from, being surrounded. These are different surroundings from going to Korea, and now it'll be Jersey City stuff that start integrating. It's kind of
It's very cool.
it's about space and time, and how again media sort of affects the way that we think about space and time.
Yeah, I love speaking of all things childhood. It so reminds me of the school trips to the planetarium. And like how massive the space can look. There's so much motion. I think it's interesting too that you not only don't mind but seem to really love the idea of a piece sort of layering over another piece of yours.
Yeah.
A lot of people would not do that.
Yeah, I mean, even in some of these elements where like this piece sort of ends and that one begins, they're already almost overlapping, right? There's that kind of goes on in this work. And, when I was putting together what I would show in this, what would actually be in this exhibition, I wanted it to be blah, blah. Right? I wanted it all to, not literally on top of each other, but, because that's the kind of aesthetic that's going on in a lot of my work. Those that kind of high concentrated spaces,
Yeah, it's very dense, but I don't know if I would say it like overwhelming in a way that I would find negative or cynical. It seems sort of there's a word that'll come to me later, I'm sure. Euphoric, maybe.
Right. I mean, a friend of mine said, "Oh, your work is like a contemporary version of like the when humans would just stare at the fire, like that was like their warmth, but it was also their kind of entertainment. We still do that. You go out to camping or something, you look at the fire, you just been staring at it for a long time. So kind of amazing." And he said, "Your work kind of like that. It just sort of pulls you in, and you just stare at it for a long time." And there is that that relationship, I think, to again to the digital media, different things that kind of pulls us in. Makes us look.
Yeah, for sure. That's quite a compliment. I know we're running a little short on time. I want to make sure to give everyone a good chance to ask questions. But along this wall we have what is this? Like 16 feet of. Speaking of all things mythic and ancient, we have what essentially are scrolls, vertical scrolls of imagery. Tell me about this and maybe how it pertains to what's on the screen, even though I know people probably can't see the details of the screen yet.
So just like what I was just saying about this kind of space that, or whatever, things that kind of pull you in and make you wish kind of with their photo on. There are things in this, there are like different jewels in here, different weather events and video games. And so I kind of made these connections between them as these kind of things that sort of suck you in and kind of like, ooh, it's shiny, glittery, and I want to keep staring at it. And of course, then, the kind of overlap of it was so much. And this piece was in 2010, and that's when my son was born. And then I had this exhibition that was just my work. And I took this video and I just made it into a whole exhibition. And so one of the things I did is made this, wall covering out of it that are all the kind of sills of that. But it becomes something different when it's on the wall like that, because yes, it's made out of all these separate pieces, and each one of those are made out of tons of media, but then it's all one thing too, right? You see it as,
Right.
like, when a pattern is patterned, it becomes something else, right?
I mean, absolutely. It's a it's a good point that, you can see the individual repeating unit mirror simultaneously with the entire pattern. And of course, it's not lost on me, and hopefully nobody else, even though it may be difficult to see in a dark room, that these represent film too, like the kind of film that doesn't get shot very often anymore, if at all, because who's using Super 8? Who's using 35 to actually make major production? I definitely see these as slices, tiny bits of film reel.
Yeah. So and then connecting all of those things with this digital space, this film media space, and these kind of scrolls from the distant past, right? Kind of all on top of each other.
Let's see if we can talk about this last piece for just a moment. And I would like to open up the room for questions. I love the color of this. It's, a lot of people think of screen color being, I don't know, it's always hyper saturated, but this feels a little different. Am I wrong about that? I mean, it feels more nuanced as far as like the beige and the
there's
lilacs.
Yeah, and there's still some of those very intense color, but yeah, I think you're right about that. This again is kind of, if you can see this kind of like this physical space that seems like trees and grass, and but it's completely computer generated. The only thing that's kind of real in some ways are these two figures that's from a YouTube video, and it's these people that like to dress in these skin-tight suits called zentai. And they're all one color. So as a digital artist, you're like, hey, I could key that color out, right? And then they'll just be a silhouette, and I could fill them with something else. So they're actually in a public space. I think that's some kind of fetish, or and they. But I keyed them out. I recreated everything around them, and with all the camera movements and everything, right? And then the other thing that's kind of happening here that I mentioned previously was that when we can see one thing simultaneously from different viewpoints, you're seeing different parts of this space in these other monitors, right? So you're kind of seeing different times, different places all at the same time. It's all part of the same space, though, right? But from different points of view. And the other thing I thought was interesting about that kind of zentai outfit was that it's both anonymous. You can't see, I mean, they're completely covered, their faces and everything, right? But at the same time, it's completely revealing, right? It's as tight as your body. So you're walking around almost, naked, but at the same time anonymous, right? And I think that happens with that allure that these individuals have with that is what a lot of people, I think, like about the internet, that they can, and sometimes to horrible consequences where they can, sort of say terrible things, but sort of hide behind the, this sort of, zentai suit that sort of masks them from the rest of the world. They wouldn't normally, say and do these things, and sometimes it's the opposite.
I was going to say conversely, it allows you to say very, personal, naked things,
exactly,
that are, very genuine.
On the positive side, and also connect you to all those other people that like your little fetish or niche or whatever it is that you do. You can, there can only be 100 people in the world,
or just normal people.
Just normal people.
But Jeremiah, thank you very much for giving me the walkthrough. I know that we could talk a lot more about this, but it would be lovely if folks out there in the cyber realm would give us a question or two. So we would love to field them. Fire away. Oh, and I should also say, if you would be so kind to submit these questions, let me come back into frame. If you would submit these questions into the chat, That means,
I have
getting
a question.
typing them. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to ask him from you, is there a point in your childhood that you could point back to where this became like a thing? Like where you were like, I love this.
Making art.
Just not even making art, like video, like technology, like you're really obviously married to it. So, you know, like like, did you play Atari a lot? I'm just wondering, you know.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, we had, you know, a Texas Instrument computer we were writing some code on and recording onto audio cassettes. You know, when I was a kid, we had that stuff thanks to my dad. He's probably watching right now, maybe. So we had access to all that stuff, and that was good. And you know, my brother is an electrical engineer, and my dad was always very, you know, and still is very savvy with all kinds of technology. So I guess I've always sort of been around it. But I think when I started making art, I wasn't expecting to go down this route at all. And it wasn't really until maybe halfway through undergrad that I took a media studies class, or took a class where I started using Macromedia Director, if people will remember that. And, you know, there's something about that. I was like, hey, you know, I'm painting over here and I'm making sculpture over here. What if I do those things, but put them into this space and make them move? You know, they don't have to tell stories like a traditional narrative, because, you know, I didn't want to start making films, you know, necessarily, but they can still be paintings, kind of, but animated, right? And I think that's a lot of this work. There's no beginning or end or middle. You can come in anywhere, you can leave anywhere. It's, you know, it's a space that you can spend a lot of time with, you can spend a little bit of time with. That's like a, you know, in some ways a 2D image. So yeah.
There's another question in the chat. Who are your artistic influences?
Well, I don't know if everybody heard that. This is about artistic influences. We were talking before, and I was like in, you know, Korea for this sabbatical recently, and this residency that I did. And even before I would, you know, even knew really how to connect him to Korean culture, Nam Jung-baek was a big one, because just all of the work he did with video and media and objects, and he was doing those things that I've been talking about, right? He takes these very digital sort of spaces and video spaces, but then, you know, often they're in 3D objects, right? He made 3D objects out of them. He made installations out of them. They're not simply video on its own, but it's that combination. So I've always been really interested in that, because again, I think I'm probably a sculptor first, and then all of this stuff sort of came into that, right, at some point.
Yeah.
The other, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say a really short aside was someone asked me to help with an installation of one of his works. This is that long after he passed away, but they unpacked this work, and they knew I knew stuff about it, and it had some you know, it had technology involved with it. And I found this wire, and these two wires were twisted together. And then rather than putting in some electrical tape on it or some sheet shrink or something like that, there was a little Band-Aid, like a Band-Aid that you'd have on your finger. And I'm like, I think Nam Jung-baek put this Band-Aid on here. And I was just like, and people are like, oh yeah, that sounds exactly like what he would do. Even though, you know, he obviously had all this sort of technical knowledge, but he would just be like, oh, I got to put these wires together. Here's Band-Aid. You know, so it's a literal Band-Aid. Anyway, I thought that was a hilarious little story.
So this question comes from Lori Riccadonna. As you have mentioned, your work has a lot of relationships to painting. Do you sketch and draw a lot on paper before beginning a piece, or do you jump into the animation and video?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Sometimes I do one, and sometimes I do the other. I definitely fill up a lot of sketchbooks, but I think that the forms that happen in the pieces as I'm working on them continue to evolve past those things, right? So there have been times where I drew something and then later I made it, and I looked at the drawing and was like, oh my God, I made, you know, like it looks the same, you know, like they stay together. But I think unlike a lot of, you know, a traditional process, yeah, I haven't decided on that yet, right? Those ideas continue to sort of evolve and change as they come from a 2D or a still non-time-based thing into something that's time-based. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I have been mentioning these kind of ideas of painting and stuff, but I don't know if I even, yeah, I mean, in some ways there are all those connections, right? Because again, with traditional and new media connections and everything, but yeah, I guess my process is probably very, very different than that traditional process, even though the end result might be on a canvas with a frame around it sometimes, even though could be a very digital product.
That's cool. That's cool, Jeremiah. All right, so also, do you have a pretty clear visualization of your videos and then work to create it? Or does it evolve as you work? You kind of answered that, but maybe go into detail.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was kind of saying. So there are times where some of these pieces, I drew them out. There's so many parts to them, so many different things. I had to figure it all out beforehand and build it. And I like that process. I like seeing that idea that was already there form. But there are probably more often things are evolving as I'm making them. And I think, other artists have told me, like, there's no way you can make this thing without knowing what you were going to do before you started. It's got too much to it, right? And I was like, well, no, actually, sometimes I don't know everything that's going to happen. And I'm responding to, this is how a lot of artists work. You make a mark and you respond to that mark. You make another mark and you respond to that mark. Well, I'm kind of doing that. It's just not, with the media that, you would think of when you make a statement like that. But I'm doing something digitally. And there's, there are a lot of files and a lot of different variations of these pieces that you'll never see, right? That kind of went that direction, but I learned something from it, and then I went this direction, I learned something from it. And I'm always experimenting, and most of those experimentations never leave the studio, right? And so the work could take so much longer than it actually took to make it because of all those kind of failed experiments, if we could call them failed, but they led to something else. So they're positive.
All right, that was really awesome. Do you want to wrap things up and just tell us who's coming next, maybe, or?
Absolutely.
And thank you, Jeremiah. That was like.
Well, thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for everyone who attended this. I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Summer. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, we really do owe a big thank you to Michelle Vitale for dreaming this up. I mean, you wouldn't think that, like, well, you'd have a bunch of artists talk to each other, but to actually make it happen is quite a feat. And I've been having a ball doing this. I love talking to you. I love having talked to all the other people thus far, because we make this because I suppose we have to, but it obviously communicates some things on its own, but it's really wonderful to use it as a springboard to talk about other things. So I really appreciate the time that you've given us. So everyone who's come tonight, thank you very much for being here. What's today's date? The 24th? I believe it is either October 15th or October 12th, whatever the Friday is. Our next artist is going to be Jana Dimitrova, who I've known for, a number of years. And her work is vastly different. So I hope you guys can tune into that. We will definitely advertise it so you know ahead of time what's happening. Thank you, folks, for coming. Have a wonderful weekend.